Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those new here, my name's Nikki, I'm an author and editor and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love. It's the end of the month, so that means it's time to tell you a little bit about what I've been reading during September. In some ways this was a slightly quieter month. I think I've only got about 15 books as opposed to the 20 plus of the last few months. Some have been a little bit longer, which has kept me a bit busier. However, first off, exciting news. I've already finished my Goodreads reading goal for the year. I set my goal at 150 books and as I stand here today I'm up to 159 and there is one more that I will finish over the weekend just before the end of the month, which will put me obviously at 160. That one I'll share the review of at the end of October video. So awesome news, I've smashed my goal this year. My husband was like, are you going to raise it then to make the goal higher? And I was like, well, I could do, and I have done that on previous years, but I kind of like the idea of absolutely like smashing this goal and it being like 125% or something. So I'm leaving it alone and I'll just see how far over it I go. Anyway, as I said, I have got a few books to share with you this month, so I will crack straight on with those. First up, Mad, Bad, Dangerous to Know by Colm Tóibín. Now this is a book I received from the publisher in print ARC and I gave it 4 stars. It's a non-fiction piece and it's looking at Oscar Wilde, Keats and James Joyce and their relationships with their fathers. And so it's a very interesting read. I mean, it talked a little bit about the father's background, how that related to the relationship with their sons and then their sons' lives and intersections. So it's probably only interesting if you're familiar with the works of those writers, if you like those writers. But if you are, it's definitely worth picking up. It also paints a really interesting picture of Victorian Dublin as well. So moving on, a NetGalley read next, A Curse of Ashen Embers by Jo Spurrier. This is a 4.5-star read for me. It's a really great dark fairy tale piece. I don't want to go spoiling the story too much by telling you too much about it, but there's witchcraft and exciting things going on. And what I enjoyed about this is that there was no love triangle, because YA fantasy there's nearly always a love triangle and it becomes a bit predictable and annoying, and this one avoided that, so that was totally awesome. At one point it looked like there was going to be a bit of a love interest going on, but things got turned on its head, so well, turned on their head I should say. So yes, a really great read. I definitely read more by this author. Very enjoyable if you like YA fantasy with a fairy tale twist. Next up, Njál Saga, one of the great Icelandic sagas, one of the major ones that I hadn't read yet, so I was really excited to get into it. I gave it 5 stars. It's a great story, wonderful characters, really engaging plot with outlawry and blood debts and various things going on. There's a little bit of a mystical element in there too, with curses and prophecies. So really great read if you're into the Icelandic sagas. Another one that was a print book, a bought copy, same as Njál Saga, was The House of the Dead and the Gambler by Dostoevsky, double bill book. This is 4 stars for me. Usually I'd be giving Dostoevsky 5 stars. So it may surprise you that he only gets 4 here, and it would get 5 stars if it was just The Gambler. The Gambler was a wonderful story, really engaging characters and really intriguing storyline. I was absolutely desperate to find out what would happen all the way through. However, The House of the Dead was really only about a 3.5 to a 4 star for me. It's a prison story, it's based on Dostoevsky's own experiences, so I expected to find it really interesting and enjoyable. And I mean, it wasn't bad, but it just didn't grip me in the way that most Dostoevsky works do. There was no real character that stood out to me that I fell in love with or anything, so it just felt a little bit bitty. It was kind of lots of little vignettes of looking at life in the prison, which was interesting enough, but as I said, just not gripping. Next up, a cookery book that I bought in the bargain bookstore for a whopping $7. Great, it's turned out to be a great buy. I've already done several recipes from it. And this is the 403 and 4 ingredient recipes by Jenny White and Joanna Farrow. This is a 4 star for me, possibly leaning towards a 4.5. It's full of really interesting recipes. And I've just had to start cooking a bit more because my husband's changed jobs, so I've had to start cooking all the evening meals, and I'm not a cook. And this book appealed to me because I liked the idea of recipes that didn't require a huge, long list of 20 ingredients that are really sort of off-putting and a little bit awing, you're kind of like, oh, how am I going to manage this if there's 20 odd ingredients? But 3 to 4 ingredients you kind of feel that you can cope with. So there were some really good recipes. The only reason I don't give this a 5 is because I kind of felt some of the recipes weren't complete. It was like they gave you a part of the meal, but then you were like, well, doesn't really sound like a full meal to me, or you need to put something with it. But a few of them did have recommendations for accompaniments, but not all. I just would have liked to have seen a little bit more, some hints and what might you do with this as some sides and various things. But that's probably just me being really nitpicky. Next up, Beneath Yggdrasil's Shadow, and this is an anthology which actually included one of my short stories as well. So my review is obviously based around the other stories in the book. And I gave it 4 stars. It was a fun, diverse collection. The premise for this anthology, I should say, was to write stories for the Norse goddesses, the forgotten goddesses, the ones that no one really knows about so much, who are just random names in the Poetic Edda, but we don't know anything about their history, their backstory. So we had to create stories for them. It was an interesting mix of stories. Obviously, as with any anthology, there are some I liked more than others. 1 or 2 I felt could have done with a little bit more editing. I mean, I know from experience of having my story edited, it was just 1 round really quick. And some of them had pretty obvious faults that I think the editor should have picked up on, things like getting the verbs to lay and to lie mixed up, and I just would have liked to have seen a little bit more effort go into the editing of it here and there. Some stories were perfectly fine, but 1 or 2 just could have done with a little bit more work. But if you're into Norse mythology, this is a really fun collection that I think you'd enjoy. Next up, another 5-star read and another bought book, and it's the collected works of F. Scott Fitzgerald. Previously I'd only read The Great Gatsby, and so I missed that one as I read through the collection this time, but this included his other major novels and a collection of short stories, and I thought they were all fabulous. I had such great fun with them. I actually read these as an afternoon read because it was a pretty hefty, heavy book, so taking it to bed was a bit awkward. So I just read a few pages here and there and did it over about 3 months to finish the entire book, which was 1,500 odd pages. Awesome. If you love F. Scott Fitzgerald, if you've maybe read The Great Gatsby, I definitely recommend checking out some of his other work. Tender as the Night, awesome. I love The Last Tycoon. It's such a shame that he wasn't able to finish that one. That was great. And he's a really awesome short story writer too. A great master of really getting a lot into a tiny space. So if you're into writing short stories, he's definitely one you'd want to check out along with Chekhov as a sort of exponent of the form. So next up, we're going to NetGalley now for a Regency seasonal romance, A Duel for Christmas by Rosanne Lortz. This was a 4-star read for me. It was a really fun story. I loved the main characters. Their romance was a little bit insta-love, I have to say. I thought that could have been handled a tiny bit better, but within the confines of the story, I guess she was a little bit hamstrung as to how else to go about that, because obviously they don't get a lot of time to spend together, the 2 characters. So there's not much option except to make it a little bit insta-love. But the main issue I had was I don't think she got all the titles correct. Like she was addressing a duke as Lord, and anyone below the rank of a duke would be Lord, but I'm pretty sure a duke is not. So just a few things like that that kind of I jumped out at me, that I thought I don't think that title's being done quite correctly. But otherwise the rest of the world building for the Regency environment I thought was very good. And it was still a great fun and engaging story, so 4 stars, worth reading if you enjoy that kind of historical romance. Next up is a book I received as an art in print, and it's Dominion, The History of England Part 5 by Peter Ackroyd. I previously bought the first 4 parts in this series, so it was awesome to get the 5th part as an arc ahead of time. It's a really brilliant series. I love Peter Ackroyd's non-fiction. He writes, because he's a fiction writer too, he writes in a really easygoing prose style. It's very story-like the way he describes history. which makes it really easy, pleasant reading. And this volume takes us up through from Waterloo to the end of the Victorian era in 1901. So we're actually coming towards the end. The next book, volume 6, will be the final book, which will take us into the 20th century. So looking forward to that and getting the whole series finished, but it's been really great, and this one's no exception. Once or twice I found some of the political passages a bit dull, but that's less about Peter's writing than about my disinterest in Victorian politics. So as I said, it's still 5 stars because it is a brilliant series. Back to NetGalley. Last Night in Nuuk by Niviaq Karnelliussen, and I'm really sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I'm not good with Greenland names. This is 3.5 stars for me. I really wanted to love it more. It sounded so awesome in theory. It was a book set in Greenland, which interesting to begin with, about a group of people of very diverse backgrounds, a lot of them LGBT orientated characters. But I don't know, I think it had a few problems. There were some issues of cis profiling, I think, going on. I don't think the way they portrayed the LGBT characters came across was great, always. It had some really good points, but I just feel that potentially LGBT readers may take issue with the way some of the stuff was done. And I just expected it to be really fascinating and interesting, and particularly with the setting, I kind of wanted to see Greenland in the book, and that didn't happen. I kind of felt you could take those characters and the situation and stick them in Sydney and it would be just the same. You know, there wasn't a great sense of place. And as I said, I just had a few reservations about how some of the characters were drawn. But 3.5 stars, just for interest, and I like the idea that they wanted to go with this really diverse and work. I just don't think it completely came together. Sticking with NetGalley for The Man Who Couldn't Die by Olga Slavnikova. I'm just doing a name thing today, aren't I? I will get the names right. Olga Slavnikova. Yes, right. 4 stars. Sorry, I'm just having a complete mental breakdown on foreign languages today. As I said, 4 stars. This was a really interesting read, but I don't think it's for everyone. It's set in post-Soviet Russia, and there's a man who's sick, he's in bed, he can't get up, and his family have been trying to lie to him and just made out that communism is still going on. So I thought that would be really interesting. However, that really didn't make up most of the story. I mean, a lot of the focus was on the young girl who was getting involved in these political issues. So it was a fairly introspective piece. There was a lot of philosophical thought and discussion and things going on in it. It's not an easy read. So from that point of view, I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. I did find things to enjoy in it, as I said. I mean, I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't quite what I expected, but I still was able to take something from it. However, I think some people might get caught out. They might be expecting a certain type of story and it's not what they're going to get. So just a warning on that one, that it is really interesting. Really look at ideas of politics in like the post-Soviet era and things like that. But if that's not your bag, then I don't think you want to pick this one up. Sticking with NetGalley, The Skylark Song by J.M. Frey. I gave this kind of a 3.5 to 4 stars. I couldn't quite make up my mind. It's a fun steampunk adventure. However, I just felt now and again I wanted a little bit more from the world building. And I loved the idea of the coyote, who was kind of the villain, possibly. It's a little bit obscure, the role he's going to play. But he kept saying "my dear" all the time, and it just made him turn into, gave me this picture in my mind of like a moustache twirling villain, you know? And that kind of ruined the character a little bit, I think. I can see why they did it. They were trying to give him a bit of characterization, but it didn't quite work. It came out a bit too cartoony. And also, I didn't always approve of the way all the romance stuff was handled. It kind of felt added in. And interestingly, in the notes from the author at the back of the book, she says that originally there wasn't going to be any romance, but the publisher wanted it. So I think you can tell that. You can tell it doesn't really fit with the story properly. And I quite like the idea of the sort of enemies to lovers storyline. I think that bit could work, but the secondary romance that also went on just felt really forced to me, which is why I struggled over the rating a little bit. But if you like steampunk, I mean there's glider fights mid-air and things. It's a bit of a sort of war zone steampunk feel going on. If that's your thing, then you definitely want to check it out anyway. Next up, another print arc of The Clockmaker's Daughter by Kate Morton. I've read a couple of Kate Morton works and generally they're enjoyable, and this one was no exception. I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought the mystery was well handled. The way we were drip-fed little facts here and there building up to the denouement. I did guess a little bit in advance how it was going to end, and I was right. I kind of felt I wanted a slightly different ending though. In some ways things were tied up, but then in other ways there were certain characters who I thought, well, I'd really like to know how things ended for them, and it was left a bit in the open. But in all other ways, I mean, it's one of these dual narratives, like the now and the then, and that all worked very well. All the different narrator voices came across well. So as I said, 4.5 stars. If you like those dual time period narratives with mystery involved, then you definitely want to check it out. Next up is an ebook arc, not via NetGalley but directly from the publisher, of A Divided Life by Robert Cecil. This is a biography of Donald Maclean, one of the Cambridge Five, who, for those of you who don't know, the Cambridge Five were a group of young men who all met up at Cambridge or became communists essentially at Cambridge, and then went off and managed to get jobs in the diplomatic service, civil service, and were spying for Russia the whole time until eventually the ring was uncovered. This was interesting, but it wasn't captivating, and I think some of the problem is that this is a reissue of a book that was written in, I think, the 80s, and some of the terminology, the way they're describing Russia, feels really outdated. The slant towards homosexuality probably does reflect the feelings that of the time, because the guy who's writing this biography actually worked with Maclean, who knew him personally. So you're talking about people who in the 50s had certain views on homosexuality, but there's this sort of sense of equating it, or if someone's gay they've also got to be a communist or a spy or something dodgy, which doesn't sit very well with modern sensibilities, with my own feelings and things obviously. And so I think it maybe needed a little bit more information saying this is a historical work, because I mean it is really, we're talking 30 years ago now it's written, and views have changed in that time, and I do think that it was skewed a bit by thoughts from another period, essentially. And finally, the last one is another NetGalley read, Shadow of the Fox by Julie Kagawa. And this is a 5-star read for me. I just finished it last night. It's awesome fun. If you've read any of Julie's previous works, you'll know pretty much what to expect. I mean, this one's set very much within Japanese mythology and folklore, which I absolutely loved. I thought that came across really well. The world building was great, the characters were interesting, and it's left us on a huge cliffhanger, so I'm desperate to find out what's going to happen next and how things are going to go for our characters. So definitely captivated me, kept me reading, kept me turning the page every night, eager to find out what would happen next. So if you're into YA fantasy, if you like Japanese mythology and folklore, definitely check this book out. So that's the end for this month. As I said, a slightly shorter month than previous ones, but I've read some interesting diverse works. I've got about 10 arcs from NetGalley sitting waiting, so that will occupy me for a good chunk of my October, and I look forward to sharing my thoughts on some of those with you at the end of next month. I'll see you then everyone. Bye for now.